When predators strike without warning, even familiar places can turn deadly. From a grizzly tearing open a minivan to Kodiak bears flipping skiffs in seconds, these encounters reveal how quickly the wild can overpower human instincts. Roadside cafes, Arctic bays, and fog-choked mountains become battlegrounds the moment a hungry bear appears. In this video, we'll explore 6 real bear encounters in which hunters, travelers, and photographers learned that one step too close can turn into a fight for survival. December 8, 2025, settled over the snowy roads of Sakhalin as 4 lifelong friends moved slowly along the frozen route in their old minivan. Sergei, the group's steady voice, sat at the wheel, guiding the vehicle through deep white drifts. Maxim, who loved every winter hunt, kept their gear close on the seat beside him. Oleg, always warm and full of loud energy, rested behind them, eager to return home after long days on the icy coast. Ivan, the quietest, stayed in the back among crates, jackets, and camping supplies. They had shared school days, long shifts, cold seasons, and trusted each other across many harsh roads. The snow thickened as the route narrowed near the edge of the dark forest. Wind swept across the trees, carrying loose frost through the air. Sergei kept the minivan steady, but ice pulled at the tires until the vehicle slid toward a tall drift. The wheels spun, caught nothing, and the engine worked harder while Sergei tried to rock the minivan free. Frost gathered on the windows as they waited for the wheels to grip. Maxim leaned forward, scanning the pale tree line. Oleg rubbed his hands together to stay warm in the dim interior. The forest stood silent, its shapes hidden behind blowing snow. Inside the minivan, warm air fogged the glass, leaving only faint shadows visible outside. Then the forest shifted. A huge shape pushed out from between the trees, large enough to shake loose piles of snow. The animal stepped into the open, its wide frame rising above the drift line. Heavy breaths rolled across the cold air as it fixed its attention on the minivan. Ivan, half buried under camping gear, felt the mood in the van change. Everyone sensed danger building, though none could grasp how fast it would arrive. Before Sergei could try the gear again, the giant Russian Grizzly charged across the snow with shocking strength. The minivan jolted as the bear slammed into the side door. Metal bent inward like thin tin. The impact threw Oleg out onto the ground where he landed hard in the frozen snow. He never moved again as the bear struck him with crushing force. Inside, noise and shaking filled every corner. Maxim grabbed his rifle, but the cold had stiffened the action. The round jammed. The bear's weight crushed deeper into the door, breaking hinges and splitting panels. Sergei tried to push away, but the door caved, and the bear's strength dragged him outward. Snow and metal swallowed him as the bear mauled him with overwhelming force, ending his struggle in moments. Maxim tried to fight, but the bear seized him next, pulling him from the open frame. The attack was swift and brutal, leaving no chance for escape. Ivan stayed silent under thick coats as the bear tore seats, smashed windows, and raked claws through the van. The storm and the ripping sounds filled the night as the huge animal continued its furious assault. Snow settled again over the broken minivan as the huge animal drifted back into the trees, leaving deep tracks pressed into the soft white powder. Silence returned slowly, broken only by the faint groan of bent metal and the steady hiss of wind pushing across the empty road. Ivan stayed hidden beneath the scattered coats and gear, shaking as cold crept through every layer. Only when the storm swallowed all sound did he gather enough strength to move. His hands trembled as he pushed aside torn fabric and crushed supplies, forcing himself upright in the dim, frozen space. The wreck around him felt unreal. Seats were shredded, windows reduced to jagged rings, and doors twisted into harsh shapes. Snow covered the floor in thin sheets. Ivan stepped outside, his movements careful and unsteady, the icy night air striking his face. He moved through deep drifts, leaving a lonely trail behind him as the dark road closed in around his quiet steps. The minivan faded into the shadows, sitting half sunk in snow and ruin. The forest along the route stretched endlessly, its shape shifting under faint moonlight. Every noise, from snapping branches to rolling wind, made Ivan pause, fearing the starving Grizzly might return. His legs burned, his breath turned to rough clouds, and the cold pressed into his skin. Still he walked, knowing there was no safety behind him. Each step carried him farther from the terrible scene, and closer to whatever help he might find. Hours later, with fading strength, Ivan spotted a soft glow through blowing frost. A small work camp rose ahead, its warm lights shining like a beacon in the dark. He pushed through the last stretch of frozen ground, nearly collapsing as workers rushed out to meet him. They carried him inside, wrapped him in blankets, and called for emergency crews. Ivan could barely speak, but the weight of everything he had witnessed stayed with him even in the warmth. Investigators later reached the wrecked minivan and studied the deep tracks, torn metal, and scattered gear. They explained that starvation from early winter storms, thick snow that trapped animals in lower ground, and the loud engine struggling to free itself had drawn the Grizzly in a rare surge of violent aggression. The road and the broken van remained as harsh reminders of that night, shaped by fear, frost, and the unforgiving power of the wild. On October 2, 2024, along a quiet inlet on Kodiak Island, Daniel Kruger moved through the cold morning with slow, steady focus. He had spent many years working as a commercial fisherman, learning how tides, storms, and salmon runs shaped each season. His crew knew him as someone who did not rush, someone who understood that the sea rewarded patience and punished careless choices. Daniel often worked alone for short stretches, checking nets and lines before the rest of the team gathered at the main camp. He liked the silence around the water and the soft splash of drifting kelp against the side of the skiff. This late in the year, the air carried a sharp bite. Frost clung to the edges of the wooden crates in his small boat, and thin layers of ice hugged the far banks of the inlet. The last salmon run moved slowly through the channel, their bodies silver and tired as they pushed against the current. The mountains around him formed dark shapes under a pale sky, while the inlet stretched out in calm ripples broken only by fish or drifting kelp. Daniel eased the skiff forward, guiding it toward the nets he had set earlier that morning. As he neared the shallow channel, he noticed movement ahead. A massive Kodiak bear stood knee-deep in the water, its thick coat wet and shining in the dim light. The animal lowered its head toward the slow fish, scooping and searching, fully focused on the run. Daniel stopped the skiff at once, trying to stay quiet. For a moment, the scene felt peaceful, almost calm, as if both man and bear shared the same cold world in silent agreement. But the water shifted suddenly when Daniel used his paddle to shift driftweed away from the skiff. A sharp splash echoed across the inlet. The bear lifted its head quickly, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the skiff. Before Daniel could react, the bear turned with surprising speed and rushed through the water, sending heavy waves outward. Daniel reached for the outboard control, trying to pull the cord, but the prop snagged on thick kelp hiding below the surface. He yanked again, but the motor jerked and stalled, pulling the skiff sideways. The bear slammed into the side of the boat with a deep, powerful force that sent Daniel tumbling into the cold shallows. Water filled his ears as he fell, and the shock of the icy inlet stole the breath from his chest. He felt the scrape of rocks under him as he tried to crawl backward, but the bear closed the space in seconds. A heavy paw struck his thigh, burning through his layers of clothing, and another swipe grazed his ribs, knocking him sideways under the surface. The cold wrapped around him like a crushing weight as he rolled beneath the water, arms flailing as he searched for anything solid. His heartbeat thudded in his skull, mixing fear with the sharp sting of the cold as the massive shape above churned the water into froth. Daniel surfaced with a violent gasp, his arms sweeping through the freezing water until his hands struck the rough curve of a drift log wedged near the bank. The shock of the cold still gripped his chest, making it hard to pull in full breaths, but he pressed himself behind the log, using its weight and shape as a shield. The bear splashed toward him again, the water rising in heavy waves as its massive body pushed through the shallows. Daniel braced himself, gripping the log with numb fingers while pain radiated from his thigh and ribs. The bear lunged, striking the log with enough force to send a jolt through Daniel's arms. He felt the log shift but not roll, its thick base anchored into the channel floor. He raised his net pole and slammed it against the wood, sending sharp cracks across the inlet. The noise echoed off the banks, mixing with the crashing water as he hit again and again. The bear paused, its head lifting slightly as the sound bounced through the cold air. The tide pushed forward at that moment, sending deeper water around the bear's legs and forcing it to adjust its stance. Daniel used the last of his strength to strike the log harder, each impact sending vibrations through his aching arms. The bear stepped back a little, shaken by the noise and the shifting current tugging at its paws. The incoming tide grew stronger, swirling around the animal and pulling at the loose kelp drifting past. After a tense moment, the bear turned toward deeper water, moving with slow, deliberate steps until the channel swallowed its shape. The cold waves settled again, leaving Daniel shaking behind the drift log, his breath unsteady and his body throbbing with pain. When the water calmed, he pushed himself upright, each movement sharp and heavy. Blood mixed with the cold shallows around him as he staggered back toward his skiff. The overturned gear, tangled nets, and broken kelp showed the violent path of the encounter. He reached for the radio with trembling hands, sending out a call that carried across the quiet inlet. His crew arrived and rushed him to medical help, where doctors explained that only the barrier of the drift log and the shock of the cold had kept him alive. The long cuts on his thigh, the deep bruises on his ribs, and the sharp ache in every breath reminded him how fast calm water could turn into danger. Even after treatment, the memory of the rushing bear, the freezing tide, and the hollow echo of his net pole striking wood stayed with him, a lasting mark left by a day when the inlet showed its harshest side. On September 4th, 2023, in a quiet corner of North Carolina, the small roadside cafe sat beside a long stretch of two-lane road. The place was simple, warm, and known for sweet-baked goods that filled the air each morning. Hannah Reed worked there most days. She grew up nearby, liked calm mornings, and enjoyed the soft routine of setting up the kitchen before sunrise. She was careful, gentle, and always steady with her work. Miles Harper, a trucker who often passed through, liked to stop for coffee and breakfast before long drives. He was strong from years on the road and had a calm nature that made him helpful during busy hours. Around the cafe, the woods pressed close to the back lot. Young black bears sometimes wandered through the area when food became scarce. One thin, restless bear had been sniffing around trash bins for days, moving closer to buildings than usual. It followed warm scents drifting from the cafe each morning, especially the smell of pastries that cooled near the back counter. On this early September morning, frost still clung to the grass as Hannah unlocked the kitchen and began her usual tasks. She carried trays, set up coffee, and moved toward the back to check supplies. The cafe was quiet except for the hum of machines and the soft clatter of metal pans. She did not notice the back door, poorly latched, shaking lightly as something pushed against it. The young bear had been wandering the edge of the building, nose lifted toward the warm smell drifting through the air. Hungry and bold, it nosed the latch again. With one stronger shove, the door swung inward. Cold air swept into the kitchen, stirring the steam rising from pots. Hannah turned her head, confused by the sudden sound of metal hitting the floor. The bear rushed inside before she could move away. It was fast, its paws heavy on the tile. As she stepped back, her arm brushed a counter, and she slipped slightly. The bear lifted a paw, swiping with quick force. Its claws scraped across her arm, leaving a deep cut that burned sharply. She fell to the ground, breath knocked from her chest as trays crashed around her. Miles, sitting near the front with a warm cup in his hand, heard the loud crash from the kitchen. Instinct pushed him to stand. When he reached the doorway, he saw the dark shape moving toward the dining area. He grabbed the nearest thing he could lift, a chair, and tried to block the opening. The bear slammed into it, pushing him back with its strong weight. Miles staggered. The animal pressed him against a booth, its force crushing the wooden frame. His jacket tore as he tried to twist away, the fabric ripping enough for him to roll across the floor and out of reach. The bear's attention shifted suddenly when it spotted an open rack filled with pastries on a nearby counter. It moved toward the food, knocking over tables and sending napkins fluttering across the tile. Plates clattered, silverware scattered, and cold morning air filled the dining room through the front door as customers ran outside. The cafe shook with the chaos, and the air filled with fear and broken sounds, drawing the moment toward its peak as the young bear reached the pastry rack, its hunger turning the quiet cafe into a place of danger and confusion. The young bear tore into the pastry rack, sending sweet rolls and crumbs sliding across the floor. Metal trays clanged as they hit the tiles, adding to the mess already spread through the cafe. While the animal focused on the food, Hannah crawled toward the front, each movement slow and shaky. Her cut arm throbbed, warm with blood, and her legs trembled from fear. She kept low, careful not to make sudden motions that might draw the bear's attention again. Miles pushed himself upright from the corner where he had rolled. Bruises spread across his ribs and his breathing came in short bursts, but he forced himself to stay steady. The scene around him was a maze of overturned chairs and smashed tables. Shattered pieces of wood lay scattered like broken branches after a storm. He saw Hannah inching forward and kept to the opposite side of the room, trying to move without sound. The bear still rummaged through the pastries, unaware of the slow escape taking place. Outside, a few customers waved toward the road, hoping someone nearby would notice the trouble. The morning light grew stronger, casting pale rays across the cafe windows. Frost still clung to the edges of the glass, making the inside feel colder as fear settled over the place. The air smelled of spilled coffee, crushed dough, and the strong, musky scent of the animal moving through the room. At last, wildlife officers reached the parking lot. Their boots crunched on gravel as they approached with careful steps. The bear lifted its head at the noise, ears twitching. It rose slightly on its back legs, sensing movement beyond the broken tables. A tranquilizer dart shot through the air and struck its side. The bear staggered, swaying as its energy faded. Slowly, its heavy body lowered until it collapsed near the pastry rack, breathing in slow, deep waves. Hannah and Miles were guided outside, both shaken and streaked with dirt. Hannah pressed a cloth to her injured arm while paramedics wrapped it carefully. Miles stood nearby with stiff shoulders, still catching his breath. The cafe looked nothing like the warm place it had been at sunrise. Trays lay scattered, chairs bent, counters smeared with food and muddy prints. The aftermath carried a heavy quiet. Workers slowly swept the floor, trying to restore order to the place. Hannah's cut needed stitches, and Miles would feel his bruises for days. Yet both felt a deep sense of relief as the scene returned to calm. The morning had begun like any other, but the sudden crash of a hungry bear had changed everything, leaving behind a memory of danger that would not fade soon. On March 6, 2025, the wide Arctic Bay in Nunavut spread out like a frozen desert, bright and cold under a pale sky. Explorer Liam O'Malley had come to this far place to search for new spots for wildlife pictures. He had spent years learning how to move across ice beds, read snow patterns, and understand the ways of animals that lived in harsh land. His life was shaped by long travel, heavy packs, and days spent waiting quietly for the right moment to take a single picture. Even with all this experience, the Arctic still held dangers he could not fully control. Liam rode a strong snowmobile, its engine humming low as he crossed the rough bay surface. The early season had brought strange weather. The ice that should have been thick and safe was thin in many areas, cracking under weight. Snow blew in twisting lines, making it hard for him to see where firm ice ended and weak ice began. Still, he moved forward, hoping to reach a pressure ridge he had marked on a map earlier in the week. Frost bit at his face as he slowed near the ridge. The ice there rose in sharp, broken layers pushed upward by shifting currents beneath. He leaned to one side, trying to spot a safe path, when the snowbank beside the ridge stirred. At first, it looked like drifting snow sliding in the wind, but the shape grew larger, rising higher than him on the snowmobile. A massive polar bear stepped out of the snow, its coat blending almost perfectly with the land around it. The animal was thin for that time of year, ribs showing slightly through thick fur. The early breakup of sea ice had made hunting difficult, and now hunger was pushing the bear closer to places where people moved. Its dark eyes fixed on Liam, curious but tense. Before he could pull away, the bear rushed forward with sudden strength. Snow shot up in a white spray behind it. The heavy body struck the side of the snowmobile, forcing it onto its edge. The machine slid across the slick ice and tipped, throwing Liam from the seat. He hit the hard ground and rolled down into a shallow dip, carved by the wind. Pain shot through his shoulder and hip as he landed the cold bit sharply on exposed skin. He stayed low, feeling the ground tremble lightly under the bear's steps. The huge creature moved to the snowmobile, sniffing at the seat and pawing at the metal frame. Gear spilled from the bags Liam had tied down earlier. The bear pressed its nose against the objects, pushing some aside with slow, heavy swipes. Liam's breath came quick and thin in the cold air. Every movement sent new pain through his side. His mind raced, searching for a way to stop the animal from turning its attention toward him. The broken snowmobile lay partly between them, but it would not hold long against such strength. The bear's head lifted, its nose pulling in deep breaths as it tested the air again. The bear stood still for a long moment, its breath rising in pale clouds as it tried to locate the source of the scent it had noticed. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of disturbed snow and spilled gear across the ridge. Liam stayed low inside the shallow dip, feeling cold creep deeper through the fabric of his jacket. Every small noise from the bear echoed across the frozen bay, making him tense with fear as he fought to stay silent and still. The animal moved again, pushing the snowmobile with a slow, heavy shove. The machine scraped across the ice, leaving a thin line behind it. Loose items clattered as they slid across the ground. The bear lifted a broad paw and batted at a small pack, rolling it away before lowering its head to sniff the ground beneath. Its movements were slow but powerful, showing how easily it could crush anything in its path. Liam knew he could not stay hidden forever. His body was growing stiff from the cold, and pain in his hip and shoulder warned him that he needed help soon. He reached one hand toward the flare gun tucked against his chest. The movement was small, careful, and hidden by the dip's shape. The bear, busy with the spilled gear, did not notice. He wrapped cold fingers around the handle, lifting it slowly until it pointed toward the sky. A gust of wind pushed loose snow across the ridge. The bear paused, raising its head as if listening. Liam felt his heartbeat rise in his throat. He forced himself to breathe evenly, then pulled the trigger. A bright burst shot upward, cutting a red streak across the pale sky. The sound cracked sharply through the frozen air, echoing off distant ice. The bear jerked back at the sudden noise and light. Its front legs shifted as it backed away from the snowmobile. Steam puffed from its nose as it turned its head side to side, unsettled by the flare. Liam fired another shot into the open air, and the second flash made the animal step farther from the ridge. Its hunger made it linger for several seconds, but the noise finally pushed it to retreat across the bay. Snow rose behind it as it moved away, growing smaller until it vanished behind a drift. Liam stayed down for several breaths, letting the cold air settle around him. When he finally pushed himself upright, pain shot through his side, and his legs shook beneath him. The snowmobile lay on its side with broken gear scattered nearby. He forced himself toward it, each step slow but steady. He lifted the machine with great effort, brushing off ice and checking the controls with numb hands. The engine coughed once, then started with a rough shake. He climbed onto the seat, wincing as his injuries pressed against the frame. The bay stretched wide and harsh ahead of him, but he knew the direction of a small outpost only a short ride away. Snow blew across the path as he set off, the wind sharp against his face. By the time he reached the outpost, his body was shaking from cold and pain. The shelter glowed faintly in the dim Arctic light, offering warmth and help. When he finally stepped inside, the weight of the encounter sank fully into him. The torn ice, the scattered gear, and the heavy shape of the retreating bear stayed clear in his memory. The event reminded him how thin the line between safety and danger could be in frozen land. Experts explain that fragile ice, limited food early in the season, and traveling alone increased the chances of rare polar bear encounters. Situations where staying alive relies on fast decisions and whatever barriers you can use for protection. The aftermath left him bruised, shaken, and deeply aware that quick action and nearby shelter had saved his life. On September 12, 2023, high in the Carpathian Mountains, Adrian Kovac moved carefully across a steep, remote slope, lined with cold stones and damp moss. He had spent many seasons working in rough forest camps, learning how to manage heavy tools and measure long stretches of timber. He liked quiet places and early mornings, and he often said that the mountain air helped him stay calm during long days of hard labor. His co-worker, Milan Petrescu, worked beside him through many seasons. Milan was taller, quick on his feet, and always alert to changing weather. Together they formed a steady team, spending long hours clearing paths, checking tree growth, and moving gear across uneven ground. The mountains around them were full of deep valleys, thick trees, and narrow ridges. Fog often drifted over the slopes without warning, hiding rocks, holes, and forest animals. Adrian and Milan learned to move slowly when the air turned white, but the day had started clear enough for both men to feel relaxed. Adrian stood near a stalled chainsaw, its cold metal resting beside a stack of cut logs. Milan climbed a bit uphill to check a long winch line that stretched across the slope. Wet leaves and soft dirt clung to his boots as he moved, the air already thickening with early fog rolling through the clearing. The mist thickened fast, covering the tree line and blurring the bright colors of autumn leaves. Milan paused at the winch line, tugging on it to test its hold. The mountain seemed quiet except for distant bird calls and the soft hum of wind brushing against branches. Adrian bent over the chainsaw, trying to clear moisture from the engine so it would start again. His breath turned into pale clouds in front of him as he worked. Then a heavy grunt cut through the fog. It rolled across the slope like a low drum beat, deep enough to make Milan freeze. He turned toward Adrian, but the white haze hid most of the clearing. Shapes moved in and out of sight like shadows sliding behind curtains. Milan squinted, stepping forward slowly, trying to see what had made the sound. Out of the fog, a massive brown bear appeared behind Adrian. Its thick fur looked darker in the mist, and its wide paws pressed deep marks into the soft dirt. Adrian straightened quickly, grabbed the chainsaw, and tried to pull the cord. The engine sputtered once but failed. The bear lowered its head, ears tight, and charged with startling speed. The impact knocked Adrian onto his back, sending the chainsaw skidding across the ground. Milan shouted and grabbed nearby rocks, throwing them at the blur of movement, but the fog made aiming difficult. Adrian reached for his measuring pole, swinging it once in a desperate arc as the bear's weight pushed him into the earth. The mountains fell silent again, except for the struggle hidden inside the heavy white fog. The white haze hung low over the slope as Milan crouched behind a row of logs, his hands shaking from cold and fear. The sounds of the struggle ahead came in sharp waves, heavy breathing, the thud of weight against the ground, and the scrape of claws tearing into soil and bark. The fog hid every detail except shifting outlines that moved with sudden force. Milan tried to stay calm, but the mountain felt tight around him, the air thick with fear and cold moisture. He gripped his phone with numb fingers, forcing himself to keep his eyes on the clearing even as his stomach twisted. Through the shifting mist, he saw the large shape rise and then lower again in harsh motion before drifting slowly away from the center of the clearing. The bear moved without hurry, as if the fight had taken little effort. Its huge form faded into the thick air, leaving marks in the dirt and torn patches of leaves behind. Milan pressed himself against the logs until he could no longer hear the weight of its paws on the ground. Only then did he crawl forward, knees slipping on wet moss, each breath sharp and uneven. When he reached the broken birch frame, the fallen branches told the story of the attack. Adrian lay still, his clothes torn and covered with loose dirt. The pole he had swung rested nearby, bent and cracked. Milan knelt beside him, trying to stay steady as he checked for any signs of life. The cold air settled around them, heavy and silent. His heart sank as he understood the truth, yet he forced himself to stay focused. The bear could still be close, and the fog gave it perfect cover. Milan backed away and moved behind the logs again, dialing emergency services with trembling hands. Each second felt stretched as he waited for the call to connect. The fog muffled his voice, making him strain to hear the faint reply on the other end. He gave their location, described the slope, and tried to explain the attack as clearly as his shaking breath allowed. When the call ended, the mountain felt larger and emptier than before. Time passed slowly. The mist continued to drift across the ground, hiding the trees and stones, as if the forest wanted to erase all signs of what had taken place. Milan stayed close to the logs, watching the clearing and listening for any sound. The wind brushed gently through branches, carrying the cold scent of pine and damp earth. Every rustle made him tense, afraid the bear might return. When rescue teams finally reached the slope, their bright jackets broke through the fog like fading colors in a gray world. They approached with careful steps, speaking in firm, low voices as they checked the area. Milan guided them toward the clearing, though each step felt heavier than the last. The rescuers confirmed what he already knew, and the air around them seemed to fall even quieter. They secured the scene, marked tracks, and noted how weather and equipment noise might have confused the animal. As they worked, Milan stood nearby, trying to understand how a calm morning had turned into such a sudden loss. The fog began to lift as the rescuers prepared to leave, revealing the stretch of forest that had been hidden for hours. By the time they carried their gear down the slope, only broken branches, deep tracks, and scattered tools remained. The forest looked peaceful again. Yet beneath that calm lay the memory of a fast, deadly moment that changed everything. On November 14th, 2019, the cold light of early winter spread across a narrow cliffside in Montana as Jared Collins prepared his camera gear for a sunrise photo session. He'd always loved wild places, spending most of his free time capturing distant peaks, deep forests, and quiet valleys. His work kept him alone for long hours, and he learned to move with care in dangerous spaces. His friend Nina Harper joined him on this trip, eager to learn more about wildlife photography. She had grown up hiking and climbing, but she still relied on Jared's steady eye for reading rough land. Together they carried tripods, lenses, and warm layers up the steep path that curled around sharp rocks and thin ledges. The wind blew lightly across the stone ridge as the first touch of sun pushed above the mountains. Snow from an early storm covered the ground in soft patches, hiding dips and cracks. Jared crouched to level his tripod, his breath drifting out in thin clouds. Below them, the valley stretched wide and calm. Neither noticed the deep tracks pressed into the snow beyond a cluster of boulders. A massive grizzly, pushed down from higher slopes by hunger and cold, had been moving slowly along the cliffside. The land offered little food, and the thin scent of humans drifted toward it through the still morning air. Jared stepped back to adjust his angle, boots scraping lightly on the icy ground. His heel slid over a thin patch of frost, and he stumbled near the edge. His hand shot out to catch a rough rock, fingers gripping hard as loose snow fell away beneath him. As he tried to steady himself, a sudden burst of movement cut through the quiet. The grizzly erupted from a hidden drift, snow spraying outward in sharp, bright shards. Its body carried both strength and desperation as it charged toward the figure closest to the ledge. Jared turned at the last second, eyes wide as the enormous paw swiped through the air, hitting him hard and spinning him onto the narrow shelf. Pain burned across his arm and shoulder as claws tore through fabric and skin. He slid across the cold stone, boots scraping for support. Nina stood frozen for a breath, then raised her tripod over her head, shaking with fear as she tried to make herself look larger. The bear reared slightly, claws gouging the ice around Jared. He felt warm blood running down his arm, the sting sharp and deep. The animal huffed, snow swirling around its powerful frame, while Jared lay pressed against the rock, body trembling from shock. Nina grabbed her heavy backpack from the ground and hurled it toward the bear. The pack hit the snow beside its feet, spilling gear and making a loud, sudden thud that echoed through the ridge. The grizzly flinched, turning its head toward the noise. For a moment, time seemed to freeze between them. Then the bear stepped back, snorting, ears low as it retreated toward the tree line, leaving claw marks carved into the icy ground. Jared breathed unevenly, pain settling into his torn arm and shoulder, while Nina rushed to his side, both shaken by the raw force that had nearly ended the morning in silence. Snow settled again over the broken tracks as Jared lay on the narrow shelf, trying to steady his breath. The sharp pain in his torn arm and shoulder pulsed with every heartbeat, and the cold air made the sting feel even deeper. Nina knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to press his jacket into place to slow the bleeding. The cliffside felt smaller than before, as if the mountains themselves had closed in after the violent rush of the Grizzly. The early sun that had once looked warm now seemed distant and pale above the frozen land. Jared tried to shift his weight, but the movement sent a sharp wave through his ribs and shoulder. He felt dizzy from the shock, the cold stone beneath him holding almost no warmth. Snowflakes drifted around them, touching the torn ground where the bear had carved deep scratches. The jagged marks showed how close its claws had come to sending him over the edge. The steep drop below yawned wide, filled with boulders and thin ice that would have ended the fall with final force. Nina scanned the ridge again, making sure the bear had truly left. The quiet returned slowly, but it was no longer peaceful. It felt strained, stretched thin by the memory of heavy paws and raw power. She helped Jared sit upright with great care, guiding his weight away from the wounded shoulder. His breath came out in uneven bursts as more blood soaked through his sleeve. He leaned against a rough rock wall, trying to gather strength while the cold wind brushed over exposed skin. They knew they could not linger. The remote cliffside offered no shelter, no easy way down, and no assurance that the predator would not return. Nina dug through the scattered gear that had fallen from the dropped backpack, finding a torn cloth she used to wrap Jared's arm and shoulder as firmly as she could. The fabric soaked through quickly, but gave enough pressure to slow the bleeding. Jared held the rock beside him to stay upright as they prepared to leave the ledge. The narrow trail down felt far more dangerous now. Each step had to be chosen with care, and Jared's balance wavered often from pain and cold. Nina walked ahead, but stayed close enough to catch him if his footing slipped. Snow hid patches of ice beneath thin layers, and broken twigs from earlier storms made the ground uneven. The air grew sharper as they descended, the wind carrying the faint scent of pine and distant water. The whole ridge seemed to watch their slow progress downward. After a long, tense descent, they reached a wider area where rescue teams could later hike in. Nina set Jared against a sturdy boulder and checked his arm again, relieved that the bleeding had slowed. He looked pale, the cold draining what strength he had left, but his eyes stayed open, fixed on the bright snow around them. The scratches across his arm and shoulder ran deep, proof of the close call they had faced. Hours later, a rescue team reached them, alerted by their signal. Jared was lifted onto a stretcher and wrapped in warm layers before being taken down the mountain. Nina followed, keeping her eyes on the ridge above, knowing how fast danger could rise from a quiet drift. Experts say that isolated cliff areas, bears pushed to aggression by hunger, and exposed ledges combine to create rare but highly dangerous encounters. The aftermath stayed with them both. Jared carried scars that marked the moment when calm land turned fierce. Nina had the memory of standing alone on the thin cliff, watching a powerful predator loom over her friend. Even after recovery, they understood that wild terrain demands respect, and even the most careful steps can lead to sudden, life-shifting moments carved into the cold stone of remote mountains.